I'm heading south today to the glorious city of Wollongong, about 40 minutes south of Sydney, where they've got quite a spectacular botanic gardens, including, as you can imagine, quite a sensational succulent and cactus area. We've got all sorts of amazing plants there, cacti, agaves, even maybe a few choice pachycall and cordiciform plants. But most exciting of all, I'm really keen to check out a glass house that they've got installed there, where they keep less hardy plants away from the weather. One of the most interesting things about this journey today, I think, is going to be checking out how different growing conditions affect how these plants are raised. Because even though it's just 40 minutes down the road, Wollongong's got a very different climate to Sydney. So, how the gardeners there keep their plants thriving and happy is going to be something of particular focus today. I hope you enjoy what's in store. I'm keen to get out there and explore. I hope you are too. So let's go, head out and see what the Botanic Gardens have awaiting us. You know I'm excited when I've decked myself out in my prickly pear shirt. I've got my fancy cactus Converse on. This is a big day. It's been a long time since I've been down in these gardens. I'm so excited to share them with you, because from memory, this place is hectic. It's absolutely wild. Really impressive collection of plants that I cannot wait to share with you guys. So this is the succulent garden in the Botanic Gardens of Wollongong. It's an absolutely fantastic place with all sorts of crazy specimens around us, and I'm going to go for a bit of a walk around and see what catches my eye. But the focus today, I think, is really thinking about how we can grow different plants in different contexts. Wollongong is overseen by what's called the Illawarra Escarpment, these series of huge sandstone cliffs. And essentially what that does is it traps a lot of moisture down here. Compared to Sydney, Wollongong gets heaps of rain. And for succulents, well, ordinarily that might be a death sentence. So I'm going to be really curious to have a look at these plants through the lens of how are they coping with all that extra moisture, what sort of adjustments have been made to accommodate for it. And of course, there's the glass house just around the corner, which I'm expecting to house a few more intricate and delicate specimens along the way. So let's go for a walk, see what cool stuff there is, and hopefully talk a whole lot more about the amazing plants that are here. Let's go. Probably the most obvious landscape feature of these gardens is how they've been built up on a rocky outcrop that extends above the rest of the Botanic Garden. There hasn't really been a whole lot of thought put into how these plants are grouped, which doesn't concern me. It's just a whole mishmash of arid plants arranged in ways, I suppose, that'll help them best survive. And if you look closely, you're going to see there's a whole lot of volunteer plants, little seedlings that have come down from the mother plant, taken root, and they're just being given the opportunity to thrive if they can. So it's a very exciting place, and close attention to detail is the thing that we're going to be paying attention to as well as I wander around. Now, as you can see, there are some truly magnificent specimens here. So what I'm going to do, spend a little bit of time looking at some of these plants a little bit more closely, see what interesting details we can dig up as we go, and then head on over to that glass house and see how they do when they've got a more controlled environment within which to thrive. Now, the first plant that I really want to highlight today is this incredible, absolutely insane specimen. This is a Euphorbia pulvinata. Now, these are plants that are available in cultivation, usually sold as one single head. Recently, you might have noticed I've featured on my channel a Euphorbia pulvinata variegata. It was in my video about how not to get ripped off when you're buying plants, and I mentioned that over time these plants, they send many offsets out, but this is something else entirely. This shows undoubtedly thousands and thousands of heads, enabling it to form this incredible cushion. Don't want to sit on it though, I'm sure that would be most uncomfortable. They're plants that come from South Africa, and I have no doubts whatsoever that this plant here must be decades old, and I would imagine is probably the preeminent example of this species within Australia. An absolute stunning plant. What a way to start, hey? Anyway, let's keep checking it out. Now we've got here an Opuntia ficus indica, which in itself isn't anything too special. Very common plants. They're harvested for their fruits. You can see this particular plant has been, I suppose, targeted by the malcontent youth of Wollongong. If you're going to graffiti a plant, I suppose you can do a lot worse than a prickly pear. But the thing that I really find interesting about this particular plant is the way that it's harbouring all these other plants within it. We can see crassulas in here and aloes, various species. There's a passion fruit vine growing up through the middle of it, you can see just here. And I've actually heard it said that a lot of these more malignant plants, you've got to remember, Opuntias in Australia are essentially an environmental pest. The country waged war against prickly pears after they started to take over the outback. There's no natural defence in the environment to prevent their spread, and so the end result was, you know, the need to import those, what are they? Those moths, those beetles, cochineal beetles or moths or whatever those things are, to help eradicate them. And so you do see these plants and their relatives. There's a few more I'll share with you in a second, dotted around the landscape in Australia. But I've actually heard an argument for, to a certain extent, their preservation, because they're typically found on farms. And as you can imagine, farms, they get cleared for grazing and for crops and the like. And as you can see, these sorts of plants provide essential, I suppose, habitat for other, not in this case native, but out in the bush, Australian native plants that would otherwise be cleared away, to kind of hang on and eke out an existence and avoid extinction. So an argument against, I suppose, the eradication of an environmental weed in Australia. Still pretty impressive plant here though. Here you go, this is the big nasty one. This is Opuntia stricta. You can see here both in fruit and in flower, but this here is the real culprit of Australia's battles against prickly pears and its ilk. Don't have much more I need to add really. I'm actually surprised to see this plant in the Botanic Gardens, given that it's a declared weed all across Australia. But I guess, you know, it's got a space here too. Anyway, on we go. If you've seen my poisonous succulents video, you'll know my thoughts on Euphorbia tyricale, which is often found in landscapes. It's that pencil cactus, fire stick some call it, kind of a shrubby, sticky looking thing, and the latex within the plant is one of the most ridiculously overpowered poisons that we can find around the place. The thing I suppose that not a lot of people realise is that Euphorbia tyricale grows into quite an incredible tree. And this thing here behind me, which doesn't necessarily look like a succulent in a classical sense, is itself Euphorbia tyricale. Just over time, its trunk has transformed into that more classical trunk-like form of a tree, and now it's just the branches and I suppose the leaves, we might call them, which have turned into the succulent representation. Very weird, very bizarre, and this one must be very old indeed. I still don't like it anymore, but hey, we're bringing together a collection of succulent plants. It has its place here. Just don't crack it open and get that sap on you. Nightmare fuel stuff. I'm always amazed by plants that somehow end up mimicking other plants that they're not even slightly related to. A little bit like this Euphorbia didiaroides. Now, the name gives us a bit of a hint at what it's mimicking here, or what convergent evolution has led it to look like. It very similar in appearance to the Didiaria species of Madagascar. This is also a Madagascan plant, so I suppose similar environmental pressures have pushed it to grow that same almost octopus-like form with small leaves emerging out of a very spiny trunk. And, you know, I mentioned earlier how there's all sorts of little seedlings popping up out of the soil. You can see here right under the base of the plant. Survival of the fittest. These plants have been pollinated by bees and set seed, and off they go. It is surrounded by some other plants like these Euphorbia miliis, so it wouldn't surprise me if the plants at the base here are actually hybrids, but you never know. I guess time will tell. Here's a Pachypodium lemerii, which hasn't enjoyed the wonderful Wollongong rain. Yikes. That being said, I'm pretty sure there's some much happier specimens in the glasshouse, which we'll see in just a minute. Another noxious weed in Australia, Ostrocylindra puntia subulata, commonly known as Eve's needle. This one you can see is in fruit. Pretty spectacular really, but you can also see how it's starting to spread across even the landscape here. Fantastic example, I suppose, of why environmental control is such an important part of managing the new plants that come into a country. Australia's got very strict biosecurity controls, and yet somehow all the time we're seeing new plants enter into cultivation that no one really expects to see there. I imagine there's some pretty hefty smuggling activities by a few prominent individuals in the trade who are bringing in all sorts of plants, and who knows what they're going to do over time. Hopefully nothing like the Eve's needles here. Now I'm lurking in here amongst the Dickia flowers, which I don't know anything about other than they look quite stunning, to share with you this stunning plant. This is Operculicaria decarii, which is a pachycol tree from Madagascar. You can see the thickness of its trunk. Fantastic water storage against drought. Now, this particular one, just emerging from dormancy, and it has the most tiny, beautifully delicate leaves, makes this a real favourite of bonsai enthusiasts, especially when they cross over with succulents. I have related species at home, Operculicaria pachypus, which, unlike this one, which grows with a more upright, straight, tall kind of form, Pachypus is a bit more zigzaggy, a bit more bonsai-like. Also, therefore, a bit rarer in cultivation. People want to get their hands on them. But nonetheless, this is an amazing specimen plant. And I'm actually really excited to see it planted in the ground outside in the wet and the wild of Wollongong. It must be a very, very hardy species indeed. My knowledge of the Asparagaceae family is no stronger. These, however, I can safely say are easily the fattest, most monstrous examples of an agave I've ever seen. Look at those leaves. They are huge. And the spines on the end of them. You can impale yourself. Again, you can see recalcitrant youth have decided to stake their claim on this plant. But really the reason I wanted to share it with you is because this beast is in flower. Agaves, if we're not aware, are what we call monocarpic, which means they flower once and then they die. And so this plant is, I suppose, sending out its final signal of life. But the good news, you can see underneath there are heaps and heaps of pups. So it's not the end of this particular clone, just the absolute monstrosity at the top. Although you can see there's another little flower spike coming up from the base as well. So something has triggered some of these plants to flower. I have no idea environmentally what that might be, but just thought that was far too impressive not to share with you. Wonder how high that's going to get. Here's a really beautiful clump of Agave parasana. You can see a couple of interesting things. First of all, this one's about to flower as well. It'll send up a nice big flower spike. But the other thing And I'll give you a moment just to look. There's an interloper here. Can you spot it? In fact, there's a couple of them. Here we go, I'll show you. Look at this. An aloe in amongst the agaves. What are you guys doing here? This isn't your place, get out of there. Interesting though, you can see once again seeds that have fallen and found an accommodating space nestled under the leaves. There's a heap of them. Here's another one. They found an accommodating space around the margins of this agave and they've taken off. It's fantastic. Really good example of how in the natural world seedlings, you know, they need an accommodating position. You can see there's an example of one that hasn't quite found its way in amongst everything there. It looks much more stressed than I would imagine, much less likely to survive. So if you're a plant seed and you're watching this, try and get your way into somewhere accommodating and you'll win the lottery and turn into a nice big old specimen. Otherwise, your days are numbered. So, on my way now down to the glass house, the cactus house. See what kind of crazy stuff is going on there. Hopefully it's not loaded with school kids on an excursion or something. It'll be very frustrating. But I suspect it's going to be relatively quiet. Let's go check it out and see what beautiful things are growing. You can see behind me the fabled glass house, which I've been talking about so much today. And I'm so excited to get in there and share with you the incredible plants that are growing within. Before we do though, let's take a quick word from today's sponsor, me. Do you love cacti and succulents? Maybe you just want to support Arid Zine on YouTube. Well, follow the link on the screen. You can buy rad shirts like this, 6 stickers like this one. And if you're in Australia, sometimes you can even buy weird and wonderful plants and seeds. Anyway, let's get back to regular programming. The thing that's immediately noticeable in here is that it must be about 5 degrees warmer. As a result, I can see that they're growing all sorts of plants that are much less hardy than their counterparts out exposed to the elements. Some fantastic parodias, all sorts of cleistocactus from all over South America, and a few pachypodiums that are a whole lot healthier as well. And along this wall, a fantastic and incredibly healthy collection of Haworthias, which I'll have a look at as well. I cannot wait to share with you the amazing plants in here, like this Espostoa. All right, let's check it out. This insane plant here, this is Parodia magnifica. One of the first cacti I ever owned was a Parodia, and it's still growing strong. But at home, I suppose it's evidence of why you shouldn't always pay attention to what the experts online are saying. Read a lot from old blokes living in England about how important it is to keep your plants in pots that are only just a slight bit bigger than the plant itself. Now, of course, when you're growing plants, as I now know, you've got to consider their context. Up in the gloomy, dark, rainy world of England, very different growing space to Sydney, Australia. As a result, that plant over the years barely grew, but finally, after a few years of neglect, I've given it a much bigger pot, and I'm looking forward to it exploding in size and hopefully sending out a few pups along the way. Still a long way to go before I get something quite as monstrous as this one though. How good is it? Stunning. Look at those spines. What an absolute beast of a specimen. Now take a look at these amazing Astrophytum capricorns. Amazing zebra banding on them. Goes to show as well how over time old plants naturally are going to start showing signs of their age, and as we grow them, our efforts to try and keep them blemish free ultimately are in vain. But I think those blemishes add a little bit of character. Astrophytums. I haven't grown them in a while, but I'm tempted to give them another crack. Tell you what, I don't know too much about Parodias, but what I do know is that those flowers on this Parodia Haworthia are absolutely stunning, reminiscent of some of the colours of the Trichocereus cultivars which have been coming out on the market lately. It's almost a salmony pink dipping down into the most vibrant yellow you can imagine. That's absolutely stunning. One of these days I'll make a video on cactus flowers and talk about them in a little bit more detail. Now this here tickles my fancy. This of course is Trichocereus bridgesii monstrosus, commonly known as the penis cactus, for the I suppose phallic appendages that it grows. However, this one's been labelled Cumulopuntia boliviana subspecies dactylifera. Whether or not this is a deliberate mislabelling or just good fortune, I'm not sure. Why would you want to mislabel this plant? Well, Trichocereus aficionados would know that this particular cultivar is best known for its very high mescaline counts. And in a garden that's not being heavily supervised, I imagine this is the plant that, well, let's just say some people might like to harvest it. But Cylindropuntia, I see no reason whatsoever why anyone would care. So, you know, good fortune, deliberate, I don't know. Stunning plant though, absolutely huge. And here, emerging from the soil like a buxom pair of legs, we can see the dual trunks of a much happier and healthier Pachypodium lemmerii. There's another couple over in the back there as well. These plants, of course, are from tropical Madagascar, and generally speaking, I find them to be really quite hardy plants, able to cop the worst the weather that Sydney throws at them anyway. Down here in Wollongong, I guess, maybe they get just a little bit too much moisture. Safe to say that the plants protected in this glass house are absolutely thriving though. Some of the more impressive specimens of this species that I've seen around. They are of course a Pachycall plant, Pachycall tree, a little bit like that Operculicaria that we saw outside, but in this case covered with a nice protective layer of spines. Means, I suppose, by many they are misidentified as cacti, but of course they're not even closely related. They are related to plumerias and also sit in the same family as things like your stapelias and your Haworthias, which is an interesting surprise, I suppose. But that's evolution for you. Not everything's looking so crash hot in here. This is a Euphorbia lactea cristata, a crested form of Euphorbia lactea. This is what it looks like when it's healthy. They're beautiful plants, absolutely stunning. Again, one of the first succulents that I ever bought, but this one clearly is suffering through some kind of fungal issue, and they do often find themselves afflicted with sort of fungal issues if they get a little bit too much water, a little bit too much humidity. It's definitely humid in here, so it doesn't surprise me greatly that this has ended up like this. And right next door, some other Euphorbias that have got a few issues. This is Euphorbia mammillaris variegata, which you can see is withering a little bit, and Euphorbia aeruginosa, which is quite a beautiful plant. I have one at home that's really starting to bush up a little bit, but this one clearly isn't enjoying something about these conditions which otherwise seem ideal for these plants. Opuntia microdassus. The urge to touch the fluff is strong, but if I do, I'm going to be in misery for weeks. Those tiny little furs are called glockids, and they're like tiny glass-like needles, get into your skin, cause you endless misery. So you know what, I'm not going to go touching the plants today, despite the voice in my head telling me, yes, do it, do it. Not today. Now I promised Haworthias, and here we are. Have a look at this incredible collection. Now, if you've watched my channel for more than about 5 minutes, you would have heard me espouse the value of growing Haworthias, especially as beginner plants, because they're just quite easy to care for. These are all looking absolutely immaculate. Have a look at this, Haworthia truncata, little pear, quite spectacular. And up the back here, can't see the label, so I'm just guessing, but I think this might be Haworthia limifolia, a variegated form, which is quite amazing. Something you don't often see in a botanic gardens. If I'm wrong on the species name, I'm sure there will be some Haworthia enthusiasts to correct me. Please do leave a comment so I know what it actually is. So, Haworthias. If you're out in this part of the world and you want to see a really impressive collection of quite mature specimens, Wollongong Botanic Gardens, check them out. These are amazing. Now, as we leave the succulent section, the Botanic Gardens, I feel it'd be almost criminal of me to go home without giving this monster Queensland bottle tree a nice big hug. So I hope you've enjoyed everything that you've seen today. Hope you learned something, and if you've got any questions, hit me up in the comments. But otherwise, that's it from me, and happy growing.